Sarah Martinez sat in the back row of the music room, watching her fingers move slowly across the piano keys. The notes came out soft and careful. She had been taking piano lessons for 2 years now, but she still felt like a beginner. Around her, other students played their instruments with confidence. The violin section sounded smooth and perfect. The older piano students made difficult songs sound easy. Mrs. Chun, the music teacher, walked around the room listening to each student. Practice. She was a kind woman with gray hair and gentle eyes. Sarah liked her very much. Mrs. Chun always encouraged her students and never made anyone feel bad about mistakes. But Sarah knew she was not as good as the other piano students. They had been playing for many more years. The clock on the wall showed 3:30. Soon, music class would be over. Sarah packed up her music book slowly. She did not want to rush. Her books were old and some pages had tears in them. Her family could not buy new ones, but these books still worked fine. Sarah treated them with care. Mrs. Chun clapped her hands to get everyone's attention. The room became quiet. All the students looked at their teacher and waited to hear what she would say. "I have exciting news for all of you," Mrs. Chun said with a big smile. "Our school will have its yearly music recital in 6 weeks. Everyone in the music program will perform a solo piece." Some students started talking excitedly. Others looked worried. Sarah felt her stomach flip. She had never performed alone in front of people before. The idea made her nervous and excited at the same time. "Now, don't worry," Mrs. Chun continued. "I will choose the perfect piece for each of you. Something that shows your skills but is not too hard. We want everyone to do their best and feel proud." After class, Sarah walked to her locker slowly. Her mind was full of thoughts about the recital. She wondered what song Mrs. Chun would pick for her. Would it be something she already knew? Would it be too difficult? What if she made mistakes in front of everyone? The school hallways were busy. With students going home, Sarah's best friend Maria caught up with her near the main doors. "Are you excited about the recital?" Maria asked. She played the flute and was very good at it. Maria had been taking music lessons since she was 6 years old. Her parents paid for private lessons every week. "I'm nervous," Sarah said honestly. "What if I'm not ready? What if I embarrass myself?" "You'll be great," Maria said kindly. "You've gotten so much better this year. Remember when you started? You could barely play Mary Had a Little Lamb with both hands." Sarah smiled at the memory. It was true. 2 years ago, she could not even read music notes properly. Now she could play simple songs and was learning to use both hands together. But she still felt far behind the other piano students in her class. The next morning, Sarah arrived at school early. She wanted to practice before her first class started. The music room was empty and quiet. Sarah sat at the old upright piano in the corner. It was not the best piano in the room, but it was the one she always used. The keys were worn smooth from many years of students playing them. Sarah opened her practice book and started with scales. Her fingers moved up and down the keys, playing each note clearly. Scales were not exciting, but Mrs. Chun always said they were important for building finger strength and speed. After scales, Sarah tried to play a song she had been working on. It was called Simple Gifts, and it was an old American melody. The song was pretty, but Sarah found it challenging to keep both hands playing together smoothly. Her left hand sometimes lagged behind her right hand, making the rhythm uneven. As Sarah practiced, she heard footsteps in the hallway. Soon, other students would arrive for their morning classes. She closed her music book and gathered her things. During lunch, she would come back and practice more. The day passed quickly with regular classes. Sarah had math, English, science, and history. She paid attention and took notes, but part of her mind kept thinking about the recital. She wondered when Mrs. Chun would tell her what piece to prepare during lunch. Sarah ate her sandwich quickly and hurried to the music room. She found Mrs. Chun at her desk, grading papers from the morning music theory class. "Hello, Sarah," Mrs. Chun said warmly. "How are you today?" "I'm fine, Mrs. Chun. I was wondering... Do you know what piece I'll play for the recital?" Mrs. Chun smiled and reached into a folder on her desk. She pulled out a sheet of music and handed it to Sarah. "I think this will be perfect for you," she said. "It's a simplified version of Für Elise by Beethoven. It's a beautiful melody, and it's arranged to match your current skill level." Sarah looked at the music. She recognized the famous tune. Everyone knew Für Elise. It was one of the most popular classical piano pieces ever written. But this version looked very different from what she had heard before. It was much shorter and simpler. The notes were bigger and easier to read. There were no complicated runs or difficult chord progressions. "It's lovely," Sarah said, trying to sound enthusiastic, but inside she felt a little disappointed. This version seemed so basic compared to the real Für Elise she had heard professional pianists play. "Don't worry about it being simple," Mrs. Chun said gently, as if she could read Sarah's thoughts. "The most important thing is to play it beautifully and with feeling. Even simple music can touch people's hearts when it's played with care and emotion." Sarah nodded and thanked her teacher. She took the music to the practice piano and tried playing through it slowly. The melody was indeed beautiful, even in this simplified form. But as she played, Sarah could not help thinking about her classmates. Jessica, who sat 2 seats ahead of her in music class, was preparing a Chopin waltz for the recital. Tom, the best piano student in their grade, was working on a batch invention that sounded incredibly complex. Even some of the younger students seemed to have more challenging pieces than her simple Für Elise. Sarah finished playing through the piece once. It had taken her only 3 minutes. Most of the other recital pieces would probably be twice as long. She wondered if the audience would think her piece was too easy or childish, but then she remembered what Mrs. Chun had said about playing with feeling. Maybe the length and difficulty did not matter as much as how well she performed it. Sarah decided to focus on making her simple piece sound as beautiful as possible. She played through the music again, this time paying attention to the dynamics marked on the page. Some parts were supposed to be played softly, others more loudly. There were places where the music should speed up slightly and other places where it should slow down. Even the simple version had room for expression and musicality. The lunch bell rang, signaling that afternoon classes would begin soon. Sarah carefully put the sheet music in her folder. She would take it home and start practicing seriously tonight. 6 weeks seemed like a long time, but Sarah knew that good preparation took patience and daily practice. As she walked to her next class, Sarah felt both nervous and determined. This recital would be her first real performance in front of an audience. She wanted to make her parents proud and show Mrs. Chun that her faith in her was not misplaced. Even if her piece was simple, Sarah promised herself that she would play it better than anyone expected. That evening, Sarah walked home from school carrying her music folder carefully under her arm. The simplified Für Elise waited inside, ready for her first practice session. But Sarah had a secret that Mrs. Chun did not know about. She had been learning much more than what happened in music class. Sarah's house sat on a quiet street lined with small, older homes. Her family had lived there since she was 5 years old. The house was not big, but it was filled with love and the smell of her mother's cooking. When Sarah opened the front door, she could hear her little brother Miguel watching cartoons in the living room. "Mia, how was school?" her mother called from the kitchen. Maria Elena Martinez worked as a housekeeper at a hotel downtown. She came home tired every day but always asked about Sarah's classes and activities. "Good, Mama. Mrs. Chun gave me my recital piece today." Sarah showed her mother the sheet music. "How wonderful! Your father will be so proud." "He is working late tonight, but I will tell him when he gets home." Sarah's father, Roberto, worked 2 jobs. During the day he painted houses, and 3 evenings a week he cleaned office buildings. Money was always tight in their family, but her parents worked hard to give Sarah and Miguel everything they needed. After dinner, Sarah helped her mother clean the dishes. Then she went to her bedroom to start homework. But her mind kept wandering to the old piano that sat in the back corner of their small living room. The piano had belonged to Sarah's grandmother, Abuela Rosa, before she passed away 2 years ago. Abuela Rosa had played beautiful songs on that piano every Sunday after church. She knew hundreds of melodies by heart and never needed sheet music. Her fingers danced across the keys like magic. When Abuela Rosa died, no one in the family knew how to play the piano. It sat silent for months, collecting dust. Sarah's parents talked about selling it to make space in the small living room, but something stopped them. Maybe they hoped one of the children would show interest in music someday. Sarah had been drawn to the piano from the moment she started school music classes, but her family could not afford private lessons. The school program was free, and that was how Sarah began learning. Mrs. Chun was a good teacher, but class time was limited. Sarah only got to practice on a real piano during school hours. One night about 6 months ago, Sarah had been unable to sleep. She crept out of her bedroom and sat at Abuela Rosa's piano. She pressed one key very softly, afraid to wake her family. The sound was beautiful, even though the piano had not been tuned in years. Sarah began pressing keys one at a time, trying to find melodies she recognized. Soon she discovered she could play simple songs she had learned in music class. The piano keys felt different from the electric keyboard they used at school. They had more weight and seemed to respond to her touch in interesting ways. That night started Sarah's secret practice sessions. After everyone went to bed, she would sneak out to the living room and practice quietly on Abuela Rosa's piano. She learned to press the keys just hard enough to make sound without waking her family. During these late-night sessions, Sarah discovered she had a natural ear for music. She could hear songs on the radio or in movies and figure out how to play them. On the piano, she started with simple melodies, but gradually she attempted more complex pieces. Sarah also found something amazing on the internet. There were thousands of free piano tutorials on video sharing websites. Late at night, she would watch these videos on her phone with headphones, then try to copy what she saw on the old piano. The tutorial videos taught her things that were never covered in school music class. She learned about jazz chords, classical techniques, and modern playing styles. She discovered that there were many different ways to play the same piece of music. Some pianists played with incredible speed and technical skill. Others focused on emotion and expression. Sarah's favorite videos were made by a young pianist named David, who taught jazz and classical fusion techniques. He showed how to take simple melodies and transform them with different harmonies, rhythms, and styles. Sarah spent hours practicing his exercises, learning to add her own creative touches to basic songs. By now, 6 months later, Sarah could play pieces that were much more advanced than anything in her school music class. She had taught herself parts of the real Für Elise, the full version that Beethoven originally wrote. She could play jazz versions of Christmas carols and classical arrangements of popular songs, but Sarah kept this secret learning hidden from everyone, including Mrs. Chun. She was afraid that people might think she was showing off or trying to be better than her classmates. She also worried that her late-night practicing might get her in trouble if her parents found out. Tonight, as Sarah sat at her desk doing math homework, she thought about the simple Für Elise arrangement Mrs. Chun had given her. It felt strange to go backward after all the complex music she had been teaching herself. The recital piece used only basic finger positions and simple rhythms. Sarah could probably play it perfectly after just a few days of practice, when the house became quiet and her family had gone to sleep. Sarah made her usual quiet trip to the living room. She sat at Abuela Rosa's piano and gently lifted the lid that covered the keys. The black and white keys gleamed softly in the moonlight coming through the window. Sarah placed the simplified Für Elise on the music stand and began to play it. Slowly, the melody was pretty, but it felt incomplete compared to the full version she had learned from David's videos. This arrangement left out all the exciting parts that made Beethoven's original composition so memorable. After playing through the assigned piece twice, Sarah set it aside and began playing from memory. She started with scales and exercises to warm up her fingers, just like David had taught her in the videos. Then she moved on to some of the jazz chord progressions she had been practicing. Sarah's fingers found their way to the keys for the full version of Für Elise. She played the opening melody the way Beethoven had written it, with all its complexity and beauty. Her left hand played the bass notes while her right hand handled the intricate melody lines. Even though the piano was old and out of tune, the music sounded rich and full dot as she played. Sarah imagined what it would be like to perform this version at the school recital. The audience would expect the simple, familiar tune, but instead they would hear something sophisticated and challenging. She pictured the surprised looks on her classmates' faces and the proud expressions of her parents, but then reality crept back in. Mrs. Chun had chosen the simple version for a good reason. Sarah was supposed to be a beginner student. Playing advanced music might confuse people or make them think she had been dishonest about her skill level. Sarah tried a different approach. What if she could find a middle ground between the simple arrangement and the full classical version? What if she could take Mrs. Chun's basic melody and add some of the techniques she had learned from the online tutorials? She began experimenting with the assigned piece, keeping the main melody exactly as written but adding small touches of her own. She tried different ways of playing the bass line, making it more interesting without making it too difficult. She added some subtle variations in the rhythm and dynamics. As Sarah worked on these modifications, she felt excited for the first time since receiving her recital assignment. This could be a way to challenge herself while still respecting Mrs. Chun's instructions. She would play the piece her teacher had chosen, but she would play it in a way that showed her true musical understanding. The old clock in the living room chimed midnight. Sarah realized she had been practicing for over an hour. She needed to get some sleep before school tomorrow. Carefully, she closed the piano lid and tiptoed back to her bedroom. As she lay in bed, Sarah's mind was full of musical ideas. She thought about the different ways she could arrange her recital piece. She wondered if she was brave enough to show people what she had learned during her secret practice sessions. Tomorrow, she would start working seriously on her recital preparation. But tonight, she had discovered something important. The simple piece Mrs. Chun had given her was not a limitation. It was an opportunity. Sarah could use it as a foundation to build something unique and personal. For the first time since the recital was announced, Sarah felt genuinely excited about her performance. She had 6 weeks to prepare, and she planned to use every minute wisely. The audience was expecting a basic student performance, but Sarah was beginning to imagine giving them something much more memorable. She drifted off to sleep with melodies floating through her dreams, her fingers still moving slightly as if they were pressing invisible piano keys. Tomorrow would bring new possibilities and new challenges in her secret musical journey. 3 weeks had passed since Mrs. Chun announced the recital, and Sarah could feel the pressure building every day. During music class, she watched her classmates practice their assigned pieces with growing anxiety. Each performance seemed more impressive than the last. Jessica sat at the grand piano in the front of the music room, her fingers flying across the keys as she played her Chopin waltz. The melody was romantic and complex, with rapid runs that sparkled like water flowing over stones. Jessica had been taking private lessons since she was 7 years old, and it showed in every note she played. "Beautiful, Jessica," Mrs. Chun said after the performance. "Your technique is improving every week. Make sure to bring out the melody line in the middle section a bit more." Jessica nodded confidently and made notes on her sheet music. Sarah watched from her seat in the back row, feeling smaller with each passing minute. Jessica's piece was at least twice as long as her simple Für Elise arrangement. Next, Tom approached the piano bench. He was only a year older than Sarah, but he played like someone who had been studying piano for a lifetime. His piece was a Bach invention, full of intricate patterns that wove together like a musical puzzle. Both hands played independent melodies that somehow fit together perfectly. Sarah had heard this Bach piece before in one of David's online tutorials. She knew how difficult it was to make both hands work independently while keeping the rhythm steady and the notes clean. Tom made it look effortless, but Sarah understood the months of practice that had gone into achieving such smooth coordination. "Excellent work, Tom," Mrs. Chun praised. "Your interpretation is becoming quite mature. The audience will be very impressed." Other students followed with their own challenging pieces. Maria, Sarah's best friend, played a flute solo that danced through multiple octaves with grace and precision. The violin students performed pieces with complicated bowing techniques and emotional depth. Even some of the younger students seemed to have more advanced music than Sarah. During lunch that day, Sarah sat with Maria in the cafeteria, picking at her sandwich without much appetite. "You seem worried about something," Maria observed. "Is everything okay?" Sarah looked around to make sure no one else could hear their conversation. "I'm nervous about the recital. Everyone else has such amazing pieces to perform. Mine seemed so basic." "What piece are you playing?" Maria asked. "A simple version of Für Elise. It's pretty, but compared to Jessica's Chopin or Tom's Bach, it sounds like something a little kid would play." Maria put down her apple and looked at Sarah seriously. "You know what? It doesn't matter how complex your piece is. What matters is how well you play it. Some of the most beautiful performances I've ever heard were simple pieces, played with real feeling." Sarah appreciated her friend's encouragement, but she could not shake her worry. That afternoon in music class, Mrs. Chun asked if any students wanted to perform their recital pieces for the group. Several hands shot up immediately. One by one, students took turns at the piano. Sarah listened to each performance with a mixture of admiration and growing dread. The level of skill in the room was impressive. These students had clearly invested years of time and money in their musical education. When the class period ended, Sarah approached Mrs. Chun's desk hesitantly. "Mrs. Chun, could I ask you something about my recital piece?" "Of course, Sarah. How is your practice going?" Sarah fidgeted with her music folder. "Well, I can play the piece pretty well now, but I was wondering, do you think maybe I could try something a little more challenging? I've been practicing a lot at home, double quotes." Mrs. Chun smiled kindly but shook her head. "Sarah, I chose that piece very carefully for you. It matches your current skill level perfectly, and you'll be able to perform it with confidence. Trust me, it's better to play a simpler piece beautifully than to struggle with something too difficult." Sarah nodded and thanked her teacher, but inside she felt frustrated. If only Mrs. Chun knew about all the practicing she had been doing on Abuela Rosa's old piano. If only she knew about the online tutorials and the complex pieces Sarah had taught herself to play. That evening at home, Sarah's parents were discussing the recital over dinner. They were both planning to take time off work to attend, which was not easy for their family's finances. "We wouldn't miss it for anything," her father Roberto said. "Our daughter performing piano music. Abuela Rosa would be so proud. I wish she could be there to see it," her mother added softly. She always believed music was the language of the heart. Sarah felt a heavy weight settle in her stomach. Her parents were making sacrifices to attend her performance, and they expected something special. What would they think when she played a 3-minute simplified tune while other students performed impressive classical masterpieces? After dinner, Sarah tried to focus on her regular homework, but her mind kept wandering. She found herself staring at the math problems without really seeing the numbers. Finally, she gave up and decided to practice piano instead. In the living room, Abuela Rosa's old piano waited for her as it did every night. Sarah sat on the worn bench and opened her music folder. She had been working on Mrs. Chan's arrangement for 3 weeks now, and she could play it without making any mistakes. The melody was smooth and the rhythm was steady. By any reasonable standard, she was ready for the recital, but as Sarah played through the piece again, she felt empty inside. This music did not represent who she really was as a pianist. It did not show the hours she had spent learning from online tutorials or the complexity she had mastered in secret. It felt like she was pretending to be less skilled than she actually was. Sarah closed the folder and began playing from memory instead. She started with some of the jazz exercises David had taught in his videos. Her left hand walked through bass lines while her right hand improvised melodies above. The old piano responded to her touch, its worn keys familiar under her fingers. Next, she moved to the full version of Für Elise that she had learned months ago. This was the piece Beethoven had actually written, with all its intricate passages and emotional depth. As Sarah played, she felt like she was having a conversation with the composer across centuries. Each phrase had meaning and purpose, but even as she enjoyed playing the complex music, Sarah felt conflicted. She had 3 weeks left before the recital, and she was supposed to be preparing the simple arrangement Mrs. Chun had assigned. Was it wrong to want to show people what she could really do? Sarah thought about her classmates and their impressive pieces. They had earned their challenging music through years of lessons and practice. Their parents had invested thousands of dollars in their musical education. Sarah had learned everything on her own, using free online resources and an old, out-of-tune piano. Maybe that was the problem. Maybe she did not have the right to play difficult music because she had not paid for proper training. Maybe Mrs. Chun was protecting her from embarrassment by giving her something simple and safe. But then Sarah remembered something Abuela Rosa used to say, "Music does not care about your bank account, Mia. It only cares about what is in your heart." As Sarah continued practicing that night, she began to feel torn between two different worlds. There was the world of school music class, where she was a beginner student with basic skills. And there was the world of her secret late-night practice sessions, where she explored advanced techniques and challenged herself with complex pieces. The recital was forcing these two worlds to collide, and Sarah did not know how to handle the conflict. She wanted to make her parents proud and show respect for Mrs. Chun's teaching, but she also wanted to be true to her own musical growth and abilities. Over the following days, Sarah noticed that her anxiety was affecting her playing during music class. Her hands felt tense and her timing became unsteady. Mrs. Chen noticed the change and approached her after one particularly rough practice session. "Sarah, you seem nervous lately. Remember, the recital should be fun, not stressful. Your piece is lovely and you play it well. Try to relax and enjoy the music." Sarah wanted to explain her feelings, but she did not know where to begin. How could she tell Mrs. Chun about her secret practicing without sounding ungrateful or boastful? How could she express her desire for a more challenging piece without seeming to reject her teacher's guidance? That night, Sarah sat at Abuela Rosa's piano feeling more confused than ever. She played her assigned piece mechanically, without feeling or expression. Then she played some of the complex music she had taught herself. But even that felt hollow because she knew she would never be able to share it with anyone. As the weeks passed, Sarah realized she would have to make a choice. She could play it safe with Mrs. Chun's arrangement and avoid any risk of failure or embarrassment. Or she could find a way to bridge the gap between her two musical worlds and create something that was truly her own. The decision would not be easy, and Sarah knew that whatever she chose would have consequences. But with only 3 weeks left before the recital, she was running out of time to figure out her path forward. The pressure was building, and Sarah felt like she was standing at a crossroads that would determine not just her recital performance, but her entire future as a musician. 3 days before the recital, Sarah woke up with a strange feeling in her chest. It was Saturday morning, and the house was quiet except for the sound of her little brother Miguel playing with his toy cars in the next room. Through her bedroom window, she could see her neighbors getting ready for their weekend activities. Sarah had been having the same dream for several nights. In the dream, she sat at a grand piano on a huge stage. The audience was filled with thousands of people, all waiting to hear her play. But when she looked down at her hands, she could not remember what piece she was supposed to perform. She would wake up with her heart racing and her palms sweaty. Today felt different, though. As Sarah got dressed and brushed her teeth, she felt a sense of clarity that had been missing for weeks. The constant worry and confusion were still there, but underneath them was something new. It was determination. At breakfast, her mother was making pancakes while her father read the Spanish newspaper. They both looked tired from their long work weeks, but they were smiling and relaxed. Saturday was the one day they could all spend time together as a family. "Are you excited about Tuesday night?" her mother asked, flipping a pancake in the pan. "Your first big performance?" Sarah nodded, though excited was not exactly how she felt. "Yes, Mama, I've been practicing every day." Her father looked up from his newspaper. We are so proud of you, Mia. Your abuela Rosa always said you had music in your soul. She would be so happy to see you following that path. After breakfast, Sarah helped clean up the kitchen, but her mind was elsewhere. She kept thinking about what her father had said about Abuela Rosa and having music in her soul. What would her grandmother think about the situation Sarah was facing? Around noon, Sarah's friend Maria called and asked if she wanted to go to the mall. It was a normal Saturday activity for them, but Sarah was not in the mood for shopping or hanging out. She needed time to think. "I can't today," Sarah told her friend. "I need to practice for the recital." "But you know that piece perfectly already," Maria pointed out. "I heard you play it last week and it sounded great." Sarah did not know how to explain that the problem was not whether she could play the assigned piece. The problem was whether she should play only that piece. After lunch, Sarah went to her room and closed the door. She sat on her bed with her laptop open, watching one of David's piano tutorial videos. In this particular lesson, he was talking about musical interpretation and personal expression. "The most important thing to remember," David said in the video, "is that music is a language. When you perform, you are telling the audience something about yourself. You can play the notes perfectly, but if you are not saying anything meaningful, the performance will feel empty." Sarah paused the video and thought about those words. What was she trying to say with her recital performance? What message did she want to share with the audience? If she played Mrs. Chun's simple arrangement exactly as written, she would be saying that she was a basic student who could handle elementary music. That was not untrue, but it was not the whole truth either. Over the past year, Sarah had grown far beyond that level through her own dedication and secret practice. But if she tried to play something too advanced or too different from what was expected, she might embarrass herself and disappoint her teacher. She could end up saying that she was overconfident and did not respect proper musical education. Sarah closed her laptop and walked to the living room where Abuela Rosa's piano waited. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the window, making the old wood grain glow warmly. Sarah sat on the bench and placed her hands on the keys. Without making any sound, she closed her eyes and tried to imagine what her grandmother would tell her if she were still alive. Abuela Rosa had never taken formal piano lessons, but she had played beautifully from the heart. She had learned by listening to other musicians and by experimenting on her own. Music is not about being perfect, Sarah remembered her grandmother saying once. Music is about being honest. That word, honest, struck Sarah like a bolt of lightning. That was what had been bothering her for weeks. She had been trying to choose between playing it safe and showing off, but neither option felt honest about who she really was as a musician. Sarah opened her eyes and began to play Mrs. Chun's arrangement of Für Elise. She played it exactly as written, with careful attention to the dynamics and phrasing. It was pretty music, and she played it well. But as the last notes faded away, Sarah felt the same emptiness she had been experiencing for weeks. Then she had an idea that made her heart race with possibility and fear at the same time. What if she did not have to choose between the simple version and something completely different? What if she could find a way to honor Mrs. Chun's assignment while also being true to her own musical growth? Sarah pulled out a blank sheet of staff paper from her music folder. She had been learning to write music notation from David's videos, though she was still not very fast at it. Slowly and carefully she began to write out the melody of Mrs. Chun's Für Elise arrangement, but instead of copying it exactly, Sarah started making small changes. She kept the basic melody and structure that Mrs. Chun had chosen, but she began adding elements from her secret practice sessions. She wrote in some jazz harmonies that would make the left hand more interesting. She marked places where she could add subtle variations in rhythm and dynamics. The process took hours, but Sarah felt more focused and excited than she had in weeks. She was creating something that was uniquely hers while still respecting her teacher's guidance. This arrangement would start with the simple, familiar version that everyone expected, but it would gradually transform into something more complex and personal. As Sarah worked on her new arrangement, she thought about the risks she was taking. Mrs. Chen might be surprised or even upset that Sarah had changed the assigned piece. Her classmates might think she was trying to show off. The performance could go badly if she was not prepared enough, but Sarah also thought about the potential rewards. She would be able to show her parents and the audience what she had accomplished. Through her own hard work, she would be performing music that represented her true abilities and growth. Most importantly, she would be honest about who she was as a musician. By evening, Sarah had finished writing out her new arrangement. It was longer than the original, but not dramatically so. It started with the exact same notes Mrs. Chen had assigned, so it would sound familiar at first. But as the piece developed, it would reveal layers of complexity and personal interpretation. Sarah spent the rest of the evening practicing her new version. The technical challenges were significant, but not beyond what she had been working on. In her secret practice sessions, she would need to practice carefully over the next 3 days to feel confident performing it. As she practiced, Sarah felt something she had not experienced in weeks. She felt genuine excitement about her recital performance. This music felt like it belonged to her in a way that the simple arrangement never had. When her parents came to say goodnight, they noticed the change in her playing immediately. "That sounded different tonight," her mother observed. "More. How do you say more like you?" Her father nodded in agreement. There was more feeling in it, more passion. Abuela Rosa always said that music without passion is just noise. After her parents went to bed, Sarah continued practicing quietly on the old piano. She worked through the challenging sections slowly and carefully, making sure her fingers could find the right keys even when she was nervous. As the clock struck midnight, Sarah finally stopped practicing and prepared for bed. In 3 days, she would walk onto the school auditorium stage and perform her first solo recital. She had made her choice about what to play, and now she had to commit to preparing it as well as possible. Sarah felt nervous about her decision, but she also felt proud. She had found a way to be honest about her musical abilities while still showing respect for her teacher's guidance. She had chosen to take a risk that could lead to either triumph or failure. She lay in bed that night. Sarah did not have the usual anxiety dreams about forgetting her piece or embarrassing herself. Instead, she dreamed about sitting at Abuela Rosa's old piano, playing music that made her grandmother smile with pride and joy. The decision was made, and there was no turning back now. Sarah would spend the next 3 days preparing to share her true musical self with the world. Tuesday evening arrived faster than Sarah had expected. She spent the entire day feeling like time was moving in strange ways. During her morning classes, the minutes dragged by slowly. But as soon as school ended and she realized the recital was only hours away, time seemed to speed up dramatically. Sarah walked home carrying her music folder and a dress bag. Her mother had borrowed a dress from her friend Carmen, who worked at a fancy hotel downtown. The dress was dark blue with small sparkles that caught the light when Sarah moved. It was the nicest thing she had ever worn. At home, the whole family was preparing for the evening. Miguel had been told he needed to sit quietly during the performance and wear his good shirt. Sarah's father had gotten off work early, which almost never happened. Her mother was ironing everyone's clothes and humming nervously to herself. "Are you ready, Mia?" her mother asked as Sarah hung up the borrowed dress in her bedroom. "I think so," Sarah replied, though her stomach was full of butterflies. For the past 3 days, she had practiced her new arrangement constantly. She knew every note by heart, but she had never performed it for anyone else. Not even her family knew exactly what she planned to play. Sarah had come close to telling Mrs. Chan about her changes to the piece several times, but she had always lost her courage at the last moment. Part of her knew that surprising her teacher was not the best idea, but another part of her felt that explaining her arrangement ahead of time might lead to being told not to perform it around 5 o'clock. Sarah started getting dressed. She took a shower and carefully styled her hair the way her mother had taught her. The borrowed dress fit perfectly, and the sparkles made her feel special and grown-up. But when she looked in the mirror, Sarah could see the nervousness in her own eyes. Her hands were shaking slightly, which worried her. Shaky hands would make it impossible to play piano well. Sarah tried some of the breathing exercises she had learned from David's videos. She breathed in slowly for 4 counts, held it for 4 counts, then breathed out for 4 counts. After a few minutes, her hands felt steadier. The family ate an early dinner together. Though Sarah could barely taste her food, her mother had made her favorite meal, rice with beans and grilled chicken, but Sarah's stomach was too nervous to appreciate it properly. "You don't have to eat everything," her father said kindly, noticing that Sarah was just moving food around her plate. "Sometimes when we are nervous, food doesn't taste good, but try to eat a little bit so you have energy for your performance." At 6:30, the family got in their old car and drove to the school. Sarah sat in the back seat holding her music folder tightly. She went over the piece in her mind, imagining her fingers moving across the keys. She tried to visualize herself playing confidently and smoothly. The school parking lot was already crowded with families arriving for the recital. Sarah could see other music students walking toward the building, some carrying instrument cases and others with music folders like hers. Everyone looked nervous and excited. Inside the school, the hallways buzzed with activity. Parents were finding seats in the auditorium while students gathered backstage to prepare. Sarah checked in with Mrs. Chun, who was organizing performance orders and making sure everyone had their music ready. "How are you feeling, Sarah?" Mrs. Chun asked warmly. "Ready to play your beautiful piece?" Sarah nodded, not trusting herself to speak normally. She was afraid that if she opened her mouth, her voice would shake and give away how nervous she felt. The auditorium looked different than Sarah had expected. It was larger than she remembered from school assemblies, with rows and rows of seats stretching back into dim lighting. The stage looked enormous, with a grand piano sitting in the center under bright spotlights. Sarah had practiced on the school's old upright piano in the music room, but tonight she would be playing on the grand piano. She wondered if the keys would feel different or if the sound would be much louder than what she was used to. Backstage, students were warming up and doing last-minute practice. Sarah found a quiet corner and went through some finger exercises silently, moving her hands as if she were playing piano without making any sound. This helped keep her muscles loose and her mind focused on the technical aspects of her performance. Maria found Sarah in the corner and sat down beside her. "You look really nice in that dress," she said. "And you seem calmer than I expected. I'm much more nervous about my flute solo." Sarah smiled at her friend, grateful for the company. "I'm nervous, too, but I keep reminding myself that this is supposed to be fun. We get to share music we love with people who care about us." At 7 o'clock, Mrs. Chun gathered all the performers together for final instructions. "Remember," she said, "the audience is full of family and friends who want you to succeed. If you make a small mistake, just keep going. Most people won't even notice. The most important thing is to enjoy yourselves and share the joy of music." The recital began with the youngest students. Sarah watched from the side of the stage. Her old violin players performed simple folk songs and beginning piano students played basic exercises. The audience was warm and encouraging, applauding enthusiastically for every performance, no matter how simple. As the evening progressed, the pieces became more complex. Sarah watched Jessica perform her Chopin waltz with confidence and skill. The audience was clearly impressed by the sophisticated music and Jessica's polished technique. Tom followed with his Bach invention, demonstrating remarkable maturity for someone his age. Each performance made Sarah more aware of what she was planning to do. These students were playing exactly the pieces their teachers had assigned, with no surprises or personal additions. They were following the traditional path of music education, learning established pieces and performing them faithfully. Sarah's approach was different, and she suddenly wondered if that made her disrespectful or inappropriate. Maybe students were supposed to play only what their teachers assigned without adding their own interpretations. But then Sarah remembered something else from David's video tutorials. He had talked about how all the great classical composers had been improvisers and innovators. Mozart, Beethoven, and Bach had all created personal interpretations of existing music and had written their own variations on traditional themes. The Tradition of classical music has always included personal expression and creative interpretation, David had said in one of his lessons. The key is to understand the original music deeply before you try to add your own voice to it. Sarah felt confident that she understood Mrs. Chen's arrangement thoroughly. She had practiced it hundreds of times and could play it perfectly in her sleep. Her variations and additions came from months of studying advanced techniques in music theory. She was not changing the piece carelessly or randomly. She was adding her own voice to it thoughtfully. As Sarah's turn approached, she could hear her name being announced. The student performing before her finished to enthusiastic applause. And then Mrs. Chen was calling Sarah Martinez into the microphone. Sarah walked across the stage feeling like she was moving through a dream. The bright lights made it hard to see the audience clearly, which was both disappointing and helpful. She wanted to see her parents' proud faces, but she was also glad not to see every person watching her. The grand piano bench was adjusted to the perfect height. Sarah sat down and placed her music on the stand, though she knew the piece well enough to play from memory if needed. She adjusted the bench slightly and placed her hands in position above the keys. The auditorium became completely quiet. Sarah could hear the ventilation system humming softly and someone coughing gently in the back of the hall. This was the moment she had been preparing for, not just for 3 days since making her final decision, but for months of secret practice, sessions and years of dreaming about becoming a real pianist. Sarah took one deep breath and began to play. The opening notes were exactly what everyone expected, the simple, familiar beginning of Für Elise that Mrs. Chen had arranged for her skill level. But as Sarah continued playing, she began to add her own voice to the music, transforming the elementary piece into something unique and personal. The real performance was just beginning, and Sarah had no idea how the audience would respond to what she was about to reveal. Sarah's fingers touched the keys of the grand piano, and the first notes of Für Elise floated into the quiet auditorium. The sound was exactly what everyone expected, the simple, sweet melody that Mrs. Chen had assigned. Parents in the audience settled back in their seats, prepared to enjoy another student performance of familiar music. The grand piano felt different under Sarah's hands than the old upright piano she practiced on at home or the worn piano in the school music room. The keys responded to her touch with more sensitivity, and the sound was richer and fuller than anything she had experienced before. For a moment, the beauty of the instrument almost made her forget her nervousness. Sarah played the opening phrase exactly as Mrs. Chen had written it in the simplified arrangement. Her left hand played basic bass notes while her right hand carried the familiar melody that everyone in the audience recognized. The timing was steady and the dynamics were gentle, just as she had practiced hundreds of times. From the side of the stage, Mrs. Chen watched with a proud smile. Sarah was playing beautifully, with good technique and musical expression. This was exactly what the teacher had hoped for when she selected this piece, a successful performance that would build Sarah's confidence and show her progress as a beginning pianist. In the audience, Sarah's parents sat in the third row, their faces glowing with pride. Her mother held a small camera, trying to capture the moment without using the flash. Her father leaned forward slightly, his eyes focused completely on his daughter at the piano. Miguel sat between them, unusually still and quiet, seeming to understand that this was an important moment for his big sister. As Sarah continued playing, she could feel the familiar comfort of the music she knew so well. Her months of practice had prepared her body to play these notes automatically without conscious effort. This gave her mind the freedom to focus on what would come next, the moment when she would begin to transform the simple piece into something uniquely her own. The audience listened politely, appreciating the clean technique and musical phrasing that Sarah demonstrated. Some parents recognized the tune and smiled, remembering their own experiences with beginning piano lessons. The piece was pleasant and appropriate for a student at Sarah's supposed level, but as Sarah reached the end of the first section, something began to change. Instead of repeating the melody exactly as written, she started to add subtle variations. Her left hand began playing a more sophisticated bass line, with walking notes that created movement and harmonic interest. The rhythm became slightly more complex, with gentle syncopations that made the familiar tune feel fresh and alive. At first, the changes were so subtle that most people in the audience did not notice them consciously. They simply felt that the music was becoming more interesting and engaging. Mrs. Chun, however, noticed immediately. Her eyebrows rose slightly as she realized that Sarah was playing something different from the assigned arrangement. Sarah's confidence grew as she felt the music responding to her touch. The grand piano seemed to encourage her creativity, offering colors and dynamics that she had never been able to achieve on the old instruments she usually played. She began to add more sophisticated harmonies, drawing on the jazz techniques she had learned from David's online tutorials. The melody lines started to include ornaments and variations that showed advanced understanding of musical structure. Sarah's right hand danced around the basic tune, sometimes playing it straight and sometimes embellishing it with runs and grace notes that added elegance and complexity. In the audience, people began to sit up straighter and pay closer attention. This was not the simple student performance they had expected. The music was evolving into something much more sophisticated and interesting. Parents who had been politely listening while thinking about their grocery lists or work schedules found themselves drawn into the performance. Sarah's father felt his heart beating faster as he listened to his daughter play. He did not know much about music theory, but he could hear the difference between what was happening now and what had happened at the beginning of the piece. This music had depth and creativity that went far beyond what he had expected from a beginning piano student. Her mother stopped taking pictures and just listened, her mouth slightly open in amazement. She remembered the simple practice sessions she had heard from Sarah's bedroom over the past few weeks. This performance was in a completely different category from those practice sessions. As Sarah continued to develop her arrangement, she began incorporating elements from different musical styles. She added some blues notes that gave the classical melody a contemporary edge. She used jazz chord progressions that created sophisticated, harmonic movements while still maintaining the essential character of Beethoven's original composition. The technical difficulty of what Sarah was playing had increased dramatically from the opening measures, but her fingers moved with confidence and precision. All those late-night practice sessions on Abuela Rosa's old piano had prepared her for this moment. Her muscle memory was solid and her understanding of the music was deep, enough to allow for creative expression even under the pressure of live performance. Mrs. Chun stood at the side of the stage, no longer smiling with simple pride. Her expression had changed to one of amazement mixed with concern. Sarah was demonstrating skills and knowledge that went far beyond anything she had shown in music class. Where had this level of ability come from? And why had Sarah kept it hidden? Other students waiting backstage stopped their quiet warm-up exercises and listened to what was happening on stage. They recognized the opening of Sarah's assigned piece. But what they were hearing now was something entirely different. Jessica, who had felt confident about her Chopin waltz, realized that Sarah's creative arrangement was more impressive than her own technically correct but predictable performance. Tom, the most advanced piano student in the school, listened with growing respect and curiosity. He could identify some of the harmonic techniques Sarah was using, and he knew how difficult they were to execute smoothly. This was not the work of a beginning student playing around with simple variations. This showed serious musical knowledge and considerable practice time. In the middle section of her arrangement, Sarah took the biggest risk of the entire performance. She moved into a jazz interpretation of the Fur Elise melody, with swing rhythms and blue note harmonies that completely transformed the character of the piece. For about 30 seconds, the music sounded more like it belonged in a nightclub than a school recital. Some parents in the audience exchanged surprised glances. This was definitely not what they had expected from a classical piano recital. But the music was so engaging and skillfully performed that they found themselves enjoying the unexpected journey. Sarah was taking them on. Sarah felt the audience's attention in a way she had never experienced before. Instead of polite, distracted listening, she sensed genuine engagement and curiosity. People were leaning forward in their seats, wondering where the music would go next. This response energized her and gave her the confidence to push her creative interpretation even further. As she transitioned back toward the classical style, Sarah incorporated some of the advanced techniques she had learned from studying the full version of Für Elise. She played rapid passages that required both hands to work in perfect coordination. She used dynamic contrasts that ranged from barely audible whispers to rich, full chords that filled the entire auditorium. The simple 3-minute piece that Mrs. Chen had assigned was transforming into a 7-minute musical journey that showcased not just technical skill, but genuine artistic creativity. Sarah was not just playing notes on a page, she was telling a story, sharing her musical voice, and revealing the depth of her passion for the piano. As Sarah approached what would have been the ending of the original arrangement, it became clear that she was nowhere near finished. The audience settled in for what they now realized would be a much longer and more complex performance than anyone had anticipated. The quiet, polite attention of a typical school recital had been replaced by the focused engagement of people witnessing something truly special and unexpected. The auditorium had become completely silent except for the sound of Sarah's piano. Even the usual rustling of programs and quiet conversations had stopped entirely. Every person in the room was focused on the music flowing from the grand piano, where a 15-year-old girl was creating something nobody had expected to hear at a school recital. Sarah felt the change in the audience's attention like a physical presence. The polite, patient listening of the opening minutes had transformed into something much more intense. She could sense that people were genuinely surprised and engaged by what she was playing. This realization filled her with a confidence she had never experienced before. As Sarah moved into the most complex section of her arrangement, she drew upon everything she had learned during her secret practice sessions. Her left hand played intricate bass patterns that she had studied in David's jazz tutorials, while her right hand wove the familiar Für Elise melody through sophisticated harmonic progressions. The two hands worked together to create layers of sound that were far beyond what anyone expected from a beginning student. Mrs. Chen stood frozen at the side of the stage, her clipboard forgotten in her hands. She was witnessing a complete revelation about one of her students. Sarah was not just playing notes she had memorized, she was demonstrating deep understanding of music theory, advanced technical skills, and genuine artistic creativity. Where had all this knowledge and ability come from? In the audience, Sarah's parents were experiencing a mixture of pride and amazement that left them speechless. Her father reached over and took her mother's hand, squeezing it tightly as they listened to their daughter perform music that seemed impossible for someone with only 2 years of lessons. Her mother had tears in her eyes as she realized that Sarah had been hiding this incredible talent from them. Miguel, Sarah's little brother, was sitting perfectly still for once in his life. Even though he was only 8 years old, he could tell that something extraordinary was happening. The music his sister was playing sounded like what he heard on the classical music station his grandmother used to listen to. Not like the simple practice sessions that came from their living room every evening. Other students backstage had stopped all their preparation activities and were listening with growing amazement and, in some cases, concern. They had prepared their assigned pieces carefully and expected to perform in a predictable order of difficulty, based on their years of study and level of training. Sarah's performance was disrupting that order in a way that made everyone question what they thought they knew about their classmates' abilities. Jessica, who had felt proud of her Chopin waltz just minutes earlier, now wondered if her performance had been too safe and predictable. Sarah was taking risks and showing creativity that made Jessica's technically correct but conventional performance seem ordinary by comparison. Tom, the most advanced piano student in the program, listened with a mixture of respect and confusion. He recognized the sophisticated techniques Sarah was using, and he knew they required months or even years of practice to execute properly. How had Sarah learned these skills without anyone knowing about it? As Sarah continued her performance, she began incorporating elements that showed she understood not just the technical aspects of advanced piano playing, but the emotional and expressive dimensions as well. The music became more personal and communicative, as if she was having a conversation with each person in the audience. During a particularly gentle section, Sarah played with such delicate touch that people in the back rows leaned forward to make sure they could hear every note. She created moments of intimacy that drew everyone into the music as if they were sitting in her living room rather than a large auditorium. Then, without warning, the music exploded into a passionate and dramatic section that showcased Sarah's ability to command the full dynamic range of the grand piano. Her hands moved across the keys with power and precision, creating sounds that filled every corner of the auditorium and seemed to vibrate through the floor and walls. Parents who had been casually video recording their own children's performances found themselves focusing completely on Sarah's music instead. Some stopped recording altogether and just listened, realizing that they were witnessing something that might not happen again for a very long time. The school principal, who usually used recitals as time to catch up on paperwork in his office, had heard the music from down the hallway and come to the auditorium to see what was happening. He stood at the back of the room, amazed by what one of his students was accomplishing. As Sarah moved toward what everyone hoped would be the climax of her performance, she began weaving together all the different styles and techniques she had used throughout the piece. Jazz harmonies, classical techniques, contemporary rhythms, and traditional melodies came together in a synthesis that sounded both familiar and completely original. Her arrangement had become a musical journey that told the story of her own growth as a pianist. It started with the simple, safe version that represented her public identity as a beginning student. It then explored the jazz and contemporary styles she had discovered in her private learning. Finally, it embraced the full complexity and emotion of serious classical music that she had been studying secretly for months. The technical demands of what Sarah was playing would have been challenging for a student with many more years of formal training. She was executing rapid scales, complex chord progressions, and sophisticated rhythmic patterns while maintaining musical expression and emotional communication. Her months of late-night practice on Abuela Rosa's old piano had prepared her for this moment in ways that regular lessons might not have achieved. Mrs. Chun began to understand that she had been witnessing not just a surprising performance, but a kind of musical declaration of independence. Sarah was announcing that she had outgrown the simple pieces and basic instruction that the school program could provide. She was ready for challenges and opportunities that matched her true level of commitment and ability. In the audience, several people who worked in music professionally began to take special notice. A piano teacher from a local music academy pulled out her business card, hoping to speak with Sarah's parents after the performance. A representative from the regional youth orchestra made a note to find out more about this remarkable young pianist. As Sarah approached the final section of her arrangement, the entire auditorium seemed to hold its breath. People sensed that they were about to witness the conclusion of something extraordinary, and they did not want to miss a single note of what would happen next. The simple student recital piece that had begun the performance was now completely transformed. What started as Fur Elise for beginners had become a sophisticated musical statement that showcased not just technical skill but artistic maturity, creative courage, and genuine passion for music. Sarah herself felt transformed by the experience of sharing her true musical abilities with an audience for the first time. She was no longer the quiet student in the back row of music class, playing simple pieces and feeling inadequate compared to her classmates. She was a real musician, creating art and communicating emotions through her instrument. The transformation was almost complete, and everyone in the room knew they were witnessing something they would remember for the rest of their lives. Sarah brought her hands down for the final chord of her arrangement, and the sound seemed to hang in the air for an eternal moment. The grand piano's rich tones slowly faded into complete silence. For what felt like minutes but was probably only seconds, no one in the auditorium moved or made a sound. Sarah sat perfectly still at the piano bench, her hands still resting on the keys, hardly believing that she had actually performed her secret arrangement in front of all these people. Her heart was beating so fast she could hear it in her ears, but she also felt a strange sense of calm and completion that she had never Experienced before, the silence stretched on until Sarah began to worry that something was wrong. Had she made terrible mistakes without realizing it? Had she embarrassed herself and disappointed everyone who came to hear her play? She started to turn around to look at the audience, and that small movement seemed to break the spell that had held everyone frozen. Suddenly, the auditorium erupted into applause unlike anything that had been heard at a school recital before. It was not the polite, encouraging clapping that had followed the other student performances. This was the kind of enthusiastic, sustained applause that people save for professional concerts and truly extraordinary experiences. Sarah's father was the first person to stand up, his hands clapping over his head and a huge smile spreading across his face. Her mother joined him immediately, tears streaming down her cheeks as she applauded her daughter's incredible performance. Within seconds, more people throughout the auditorium were rising to their feet. Miguel, who had never seen adults act this way at a school event, looked around in amazement before starting to clap his small hands as enthusiastically as everyone else. He did not understand all the musical details of what his sister had accomplished, but he knew that something very special had just happened. Mrs. Chun walked across the stage towards Sarah, her expression a mixture of amazement, pride, and gentle confusion. When she reached the piano bench, she put her hand on Sarah's shoulder and leaned down to speak quietly in her ear. "Sarah, that was absolutely extraordinary," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "We need to talk very soon about your musical education and what opportunities might be available to you." The standing ovation continued for what seemed like several minutes. Sarah finally stood up from the piano bench and gave a small, nervous bow to the audience. The applause grew even louder, and she heard people calling out, "Bravo!" and "Amazing!" from various parts of the auditorium. As Sarah walked off the stage, she was surrounded by other students who were staring at her with new respect and curiosity. Jessica approached her with wide eyes and said, "Sarah, I had no idea you could play like that. That was incredible. Where did you learn to do all those things?" Tom, the advanced student everyone looked up to, shook Sarah's hand and said, "That was really impressive. Your arrangement was creative and technically solid. I'd love to know what pieces you're working on and where you study privately." Sarah felt overwhelmed by all the attention and questions. For so long she had kept her musical growth secret. And now, suddenly, everyone wanted to know about her practice routine, her teacher, and her training. She did not know how to explain that most of her learning had happened alone in her living room with an old piano and free internet videos. As the recital continued with the remaining students, word about Sarah's performance spread quickly among the audience members. Parents who had not been paying close attention earlier were asking their neighbors what had happened and who that remarkable young pianist was. During intermission, several adults approached Sarah and her parents with business cards and invitations. Dr. Amanda Rodriguez, director of the Regional Youth Orchestra, introduced herself and asked if Sarah would be interested in auditioning for their program. Professor Michael Chang from the University Music Department gave Sarah's mother his card and suggested that Sarah might benefit from more advanced instruction. Most surprising of all was the conversation with Elena Vasquez, a professional pianist who performed with the City Symphony Orchestra. She had been attending the recital because her nephew was in the violin section, but Sarah's performance had captured her complete attention. "Your daughter has extraordinary natural talent," she told Sarah's parents. "But more than that, she has the musical intelligence and creative instinct that cannot be taught. These are gifts that should be nurtured with the best possible instruction and opportunities." Sarah listened to these conversations with growing amazement. These were serious musicians and educators talking about her as if she was a real pianist with genuine potential. Just a few hours ago, she had been a beginning student worried about playing a simple piece without making mistakes. Her parents were equally amazed, but also concerned about the practical implications of what they were hearing. Private lessons with qualified teachers were expensive. Youth orchestra participation required time and transportation that their work schedules made difficult. University preparation programs were designed for families with very different financial resources than theirs, but Roberto and Maria, Elena Martinez were not people who backed down from challenges when their children's futures were involved. As they listened to the various opportunities being described, they began making mental calculations about what sacrifices they could make and what resources they could find. After the recital ended and most people had gone home, Mrs. Chun asked Sarah and her parents to stay behind for a private conversation. They sat in the front row of the now empty auditorium while Mrs. Chun tried to understand what had happened that evening. "Sarah," she began gently, "I need to understand how you learned to play at the level you demonstrated tonight. The arrangement you performed was far beyond anything we have covered in class, and it required advanced technical skills and music theory knowledge that typically take years to develop." Sarah felt nervous about explaining her secret practice sessions, but she realized that hiding her abilities was no longer possible or necessary. Slowly and carefully, she told Mrs. Chun about the online tutorials, the late-night practice on Abuela Rosa's piano, and the months she had spent teaching herself advanced techniques. "I never meant to be dishonest," Sarah said. "I just didn't want anyone to think I was showing off or trying to be better than my classmates. And I wasn't sure if what I was learning on my own was really correct or good enough." Mrs. Chun listened carefully to Sarah's explanation, nodding thoughtfully. As she began to understand the situation, "Sarah, what you accomplished through your own motivation and hard work is remarkable. But now it's time to make sure you get the proper guidance and opportunities that match your true abilities and dedication." Over the following weeks, Sarah's life changed in ways she could never have imagined. With Mrs. Chan's help, her parents found a way to afford lessons with a qualified private teacher. The youth orchestra offered Sarah a partial scholarship that made participation possible. The university music program invited her to attend weekend workshops for advanced young musicians. Most importantly, Sarah no longer had to hide her musical growth or pretend to be less skilled than she actually was. She could practice openly, ask questions about advanced techniques, and work on challenging pieces that matched her abilities and interests. The simple Fur-Elise arrangement that had started her journey became the piece that changed her life. By finding the courage to be honest about her musical abilities and to share her true voice with an audience, Sarah had opened doors to opportunities and relationships that would shape her future as a musician. Years later, when Sarah had become a professional pianist performing with orchestras and giving solo recitals, she would still remember that Tuesday evening at her school auditorium as the moment when her real musical life began. It was the night she learned that taking risks, being authentic, and sharing your true gifts with the world could lead to transformations more extraordinary than any simple tune could have predicted.